Wyoming Territory, June 1883. The wind kicked up dust along the overland trail as Rosalyn Vickers gripped the reins of her borrowed mare, her heart pounding louder than the hooves beneath her. She had ridden through the night, the hem of her lace wedding dress torn and dirt-streaked, her hands raw from holding on. Her corset dug into her ribs with every breath, but she refused to stop. Not until she was far from Fort Laramie and the man who pretended to buy her hand like cattle. The dowry had not been agreed on by her. Her father, a banker with debts and desperation, had sealed the deal while she was still sewing the hem of her wedding gown. $2,000 and her future, sold to a man twice her age with a cruel smile and a reputation for hitting the women he kept. Rosalyn hadn't known until the morning of the wedding, and by then, there had been only one choice left: run. By the time the sun rose behind her, the mare stumbled from exhaustion. Rosalyn slid off and pressed a hand to the horse's neck, whispering thanks. She didn't know where she was, only that the land had gone flatter and wider, and wind swept across the sagebrush in long, lonely sighs. She spotted the ranch an hour later: low wooden fences, a barn in need of paint, a wide porch and a clothesline flapping. Smoke rose from the chimney. The place looked lived in but quiet. It had the kind of stillness that felt safe. She limped up the path, her boots covered in dust. Her knuckles stung as she knocked on the door. It opened slow, revealing a tall man with sharp shoulders and a day's worth of stubble. His brown hair was swept back, his eyes cautious but not unkind. He held a rifle by instinct but lowered it when he saw her. "Ma'am," he asked, "you hurt?" Rosalyn's lips trembled. I need help." He stepped aside without another word. She crossed the threshold, breath catching. It smelled of coffee and leather inside. The kitchen table had an empty plate and a folded newspaper. A child's toy horse rested on the windowsill. The man watched her carefully. "Name's Yates Abbott. This is my place." She nodded once. Rosalyn Vickers." He angled his head. "You are running from someone." "Yes," she said, voice breaking. "I was meant to marry a man. My father sold me off with a dowry I never agreed to. I ran, rode all night." Yates looked her over, not with judgment, just a long, steady gaze that made her feel seen in a way that wasn't frightening. "You picked a good direction," he said. "This land's mine, nearest neighbor's 5 miles east. You can rest here." She lowered her head, relief washing through her legs. "Thank you," he gestured to a chair. "Sit. I'll get water." She sank into the chair, hands trembling as she unlaced her gloves. Her body ached all over. When Yates returned, he set a tin cup in front of her and a damp cloth. "Do you want to tell me the rest?" he asked, quiet. "My father was deep in debt, promised me to a man named Curtis Harlan. He's a banker too, but cruel, known for it. I found out the morning of the wedding, so I took a horse and left." Yates nodded. "You were right to run." She looked up at him. "You believe me?" "I do." A little voice called from the back room. "Papa?" Rosalyn blinked. Yates turned toward the hallway. "Come here, Ada." A small girl toddled in, maybe 4 or 5, with dark curls and sleepy eyes. She clutched a stuffed cloth rabbit. Rosalyn's heart squeezed. "This is Ada," Yates said. "Her mama passed 3 winters ago. Fever." "I'm sorry," Rosalyn said gently. Ada studied her quietly, then patted over and held up the rabbit. "Her name's Daisy." Rosalyn smiled, touched the soft ear of the toy. "She's lovely." Yates watched them, something easing in his face. Rosalyn stayed 2 days in the spare room, and in that time the world outside seemed to fade. She helped Ada wash berries, swept the porch, and folded the girls' dresses by habit. Yates never asked questions she was not ready to answer. He fixed the barn door and kept the fire going. When she stepped outside, he was always near but never too close. On the 3rd morning, she stood in bare feet at the porch railing, watching the sun rise over the hills. Yates stepped beside her, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You sleep all right?" he asked. She nodded. "Better than I have in weeks." He handed her the coffee. Their fingers brushed. She did not pull away. "I've got an old wagon out back, still in working shape. If you want me to take you to the next town, I will," he said. Rosalyn turned to him. Do you want me to go? He looked at her then, not rushed, not guarded. I want you safe. She sipped the coffee. I feel safe here, he swallowed. Then you can stay if you want. I do, she said, voice quiet but sure. Yates nodded once, then looked out at the rising sun. Then we will find a way forward. That evening, she helped Yates mend fence posts. They worked side by side until the sky turned pink. When Ada fell asleep curled up with her rabbit in Rosalyn's lap, Yates watched them with a look that said more than words. You are good with her, he said. I never had siblings, Rosalyn said, but I always wanted a big family. He smiled just a little. Ada has never taken to anyone that fast. Rosalyn looked down at the sleeping child, her heart aching in a new way. She is easy to love, Yates nodded. So are you. She looked up, startled. He stepped closer, slow. I do not say things I do not mean. I believe you, she said. His hand brushed her cheek, calloused and warm. She leaned into it without thinking, and when he kissed her, it was soft and sure and full of something she had never been given before, care. From that night on, she belonged to the ranch as much as the wind and the hills did. And the promise between them, unspoken but real, began to grow into something stronger than either of them expected. The morning after the first summer rain, Rosalyn stood at the pump behind the house, sleeves rolled to the elbows of Yates's old shirt, drawing water into a basin. The hem brushed her calves, the fabric soft with age. Ada crouched nearby in the dirt, lining up polished stones with solemn concentration. Yates passed through the yard carrying a sack of seed potatoes, his shirt sticking at the back from the damp air. He glanced toward the sky, then toward Rosalyn. Storm didn't break the fence line, he said, but the far paddock's soft, best not take the wagon down till it dries. I won't wander far, Rosalyn replied, wiping her hands on a cloth. I was thinking of planting salvia along the edge of the porch. It keeps bugs off the windows. You know plants, my mother taught me. She grew herbs behind our row house in Cheyenne, said a woman should always know what'll heal and what'll harm. Yates looked at her longer than he needed to, then he nodded. Show me sometime. After supper, Rosalyn found an old ledger in the cupboard above the hearth. The pages were yellowed, ink fading in places, but it was clear someone had once kept careful track births, calf counts, trade prices for salt pork. She ran a finger down the margin. Whose handwriting is this? Yates reached for the kettle but didn't answer right away. My brother's. He ran the place before me, left for Colorado when the mines opened up. I stayed. Why, this land's stubborn like me. She leaned against the table, watching him pour water into the tin basin. You're not like I thought a rancher would be. Is that so? You take your time with things. He met her gaze. Not everything needs to be rushed. Ada stirred from her cot in the corner, letting out a soft sound. Rosalyn crossed to her, tucking the quilt higher. The girl's fingers curled around the edge, breath evening out. Yates stood in the kitchen doorway, arms folded, watching the quiet settle back into the room. Later, as twilight pressed against the windows, Rosalyn unpacked the sewing kit from her carpet bag. She sat by the fire, mending the sleeve of a girl's nightdress, the fabric worn thin at the elbow. Yates came in from checking the barn, boots heavy but movements quiet. I've been thinking about what you said, he began, setting his hat on the hook. Rosalyn didn't look up from her stitching. About what, your mother, the herbs? You ever think of using that for more than your own garden? She paused, thread pulled taut between her fingers. I used to gather for neighbors, helped with poultices, teas. Folks started coming by with their children when fever went around. But when my father remarried, his wife said it wasn't proper. Said I was attracting the wrong kind of attention. Was she wrong? No. Rosalyn folded the fabric along the finished seam, but she didn't understand. I wasn't trying to be seen. I just wanted to be useful. Yates took a slow breath, then walked over and crouched beside the hearth, resting his hands on his knees. You still want that? She looked at him steadily. I don't know who I am out here yet. I think you do, he said. You just haven't been given the room. They stayed like that, the firelight flickering between them, until Ada stirred again. Rosalyn rose and brushed the girl's forehead. In the days that followed, she began to take on more. She washed saddle blankets, learned the rhythm of the milking, and started planting salvias by the porch just as she'd said. Yates brought her a sack of dried lavender from the pantry, tucked away since the last time it had rained before Ada could walk. One afternoon, she tied her hair back with a strip of muslin and asked Yates if she could try baking bread. He stood just inside the doorway, watching her knead. "You ever thought of staying?" he asked plainly. Rosalyn wiped flour from her cheek with the back of her wrist. "I've thought of little else. You'd be your own woman here, no one to tell you you're too much or not enough." "And what would I be to you?" she asked, voice steady. He stepped forward, slow. "You'd be the woman who brought the smell of bread back into this house. Who turned silence into something warm." Rosalyn didn't answer right away. She looked down at her hands in the dough, then up into his eyes. "I'd want more than shelter. I'd give more," he said. "But only if you asked." That night, Rosalyn moved her things from the spare room to the one across the hall, where the morning light hit the windows first. Ada clambered onto the bed and declared it a castle. Yates stood in the doorway, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. No kiss passed between them that night, no whispered vows. But when Yates handed her the second pillow from his own bed and she placed it beside hers, something settled in both of them. Not an ending, the beginning of something real. The calves had wandered toward the creek again. Yates spotted them near the bend where the cottonwoods leaned low and the current ran shallow. He'd meant to mend the break in the fence 2 days ago, but the post-hole digger had split, and Rosalyn had needed help setting her herb bed behind the shed. He swung into the saddle with a quiet click of his tongue to the gelding and rode out, the morning light still gold across the grass. Rosalyn stood on the porch, her apron damp from rinsing Ada's stockings, and watched him go. She shaded her eyes with her hand, not because the sun was too bright, but because she liked the way he sat a horse. Balanced and sure, like the land bowed a little under his weight and didn't mind it. Inside, Ada sat on the floor with a length of twine and a wooden spool. She had taken to winding it back and forth between her fingers, pretending it was a lasso. Rosalyn crouched beside her. "Where did you learn that?" she asked. "Papa showed me when I was little, before you came." Rosalyn reached for a scrap of cloth and began cutting it into strips for quilting. "What else did he teach you?" Ada leaned close. "How to ride by holding the horn, and that you don't have to talk to someone to love them." Rosalyn paused, her scissors still in mid-air. Ada added quieter, "He didn't say it with words. I just knew." The fire in the stove had gone down to a soft heat. Rosalyn rose and added a few pieces of split juniper, then pressed her palms together and looked out the window, long and quiet. By late afternoon, clouds had gathered off the western ridge. Yates returned with the calves nudging at the back of his horse. Rosalyn met him at the barn, pulling her shawl tight. "Fence?" she asked. "Held better than I thought." He dismounted. "But I'll still lay new rails before next week." "Weather's shifting." She handed him a ladle of water from the bucket. He drank, then wiped his mouth with his sleeve. "I was thinking," she said, stepping closer. "There's a woman I met once, years back. She ran the post at Hat Creek Station. Kept spare supplies for travelers, sewed up busted boots, even set bones when the doctor couldn't get there in time." Yates leaned on the fence, arms crossed. "You want to do something like that here, if there's need," she said. "I've got hands enough. And this place, it could be more than land and cattle." He studied her. "You wouldn't mind strangers coming up the road?" he asked. "If they need help, no. If they bring trouble, I'll send them on." His eyes didn't leave hers. "You do it well." She looked down. "I've never been trusted to do much of anything. You are now." A wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain. Rosalyn turned her face into it. Yates watched the way her hair lifted, loose strands catching against her cheek. He reached out and tucked one behind her ear, his fingers brushing her skin. She didn't move away. "You ever think of marrying again?" His hand dropped. "I did once. Then I figured it wasn't fair to ask someone to carry all this." "All what?" He glanced toward the horizon. "The weight of a place that remembers things." Rosalyn stepped forward. I'm not afraid of memory. He looked at her, long and quiet. Then yes, I've thought of it. They said nothing more as the first drops of rain fell. He took her hand, not quick, not unsure, and led her back toward the house. Ada stood on the porch, arms outstretched to the sky, catching water in her open hands. She laughed when they reached her, and Yates scooped her up with one arm. Inside, the storm came down hard. Thunder rolled over the hills, the kind that settled into your chest. Rosalyn lit the lamp, its glow steady against the dark. Later, with Ada asleep in her cot and the windows fogged with warmth, Rosalyn sat by the hearth, mending the hem of a work shirt she'd found in the back of the cupboard. Yates came in with 2 mugs of tea, steam curling into the space between them. He sat across from her, but closer than he had before. She took the mug, cradling the heat. "I have no dowry," she said suddenly. "Not a cent to my name." "I never asked for one," he replied. "I haven't got fine manners, I can't play an instrument or speak French." "I don't need any of that," she hesitated. "What do you need?" Yates set his mug down. "Someone who sees this place and doesn't only see work, someone who stays." Rosalyn looked into the fire. "I can do that." When she turned back to him, his hand was already reaching for hers. She met it halfway. They didn't kiss that night. They didn't need to. The way their fingers laced together under the soft light was more than promise it was beginning. By late July, the air settled into that high summer stillness where every sound carried a screen door creaking, a horse shifting in its stall, the rasp of a hoe through dry earth. Rosalyn moved slowly through the vegetable rows behind the house, brushing soil from her palms as she stood. She had begun rising earlier, slipping out before Ada woke, her skirts wet with dew by the time the sun cleared the ridgeline. Yates was already in the south pasture, driving posts deeper where the ground had cracked. He'd left before dawn, a habit she'd begun to read as care rather than avoidance. When she returned to the porch, Ada sat cross-legged on the step, a bowl of shelled peas in her lap and her rabbit tucked beneath her arm. "I told Daisy she can't come to town," Ada said without looking up. Rosalyn lowered herself beside her. "Is that so? She always loses her head over new things." Rosalyn smiled into her cup. "Well, we'll leave her with the hens." They were heading to Wallace's Mercantile in Elk Hollow, the nearest trading post that stocked more than flour and nails. The trip required half a day's ride by wagon, which meant Ada's boots had been polished the night before, and Rosalyn had laid out her brown calico dress, the one with the tiny buttons she struggled to fasten without Yates's help. She stepped into the kitchen and ran a brush through her hair. The cracked mirror above the basin caught her reflection in pieces, but she could see enough to pin it into place. Her hands paused at her collar. "Do you mind folks seeing us together?" she asked as Yates came in, wiping sweat from his brow. He reached for the basin, splashing his face. "No, you don't think it'll start talk?" He dried his hands on a cloth. "It might." She waited. "Let them talk," he said. "Nothing they say changes what we've built here," she exhaled, slow. "I suppose that's true." On the road, the wagon rocked gently, the wheels kicking up dust. Ada leaned on Rosalyn's arm, already dozing before they'd passed the second ridge. Yates held the reins loose, his eyes scanning the hills ahead. "I've been thinking about the shed," Rosalyn said. "It's sound, but if we raised the roof a little, I could keep a shelf of tinctures in there. Maybe even a cot if someone needed to rest." Yates didn't answer right away. "Then, you'd need a ledger, keep records." "I've thought of that. And you'd charge?" "I wouldn't take what folks didn't have, but yes, a little," he nodded. "Folks'll come. Do you think they'll trust me?" He looked over at her. "They'll trust what you do, not what you say." They rode the rest of the way in silence, the kind that felt full rather than empty. Elk Hollow came into view by midday, its buildings sun-bleached and low to the ground. 2 wagons were already tied out front, and the sound of a fiddle drifted faintly from the saloon down the street. Inside the store, Rosalyn moved between shelves with Ada's hand in hers. She picked out dried beans, chamomile, and a small tin of turpentine. Yates lingered near the counter, speaking in low tones to a man with a cast on his arm. Rosalyn traced the edge of a bolt of muslin, her thumb grazing the weave. A woman nearby glanced at her, then at Yates, and turned back to her basket without a word. "Do you know her?" Rosalyn asked quietly. Yates came up beside her. "Name's Mrs. Delancey. She's the one who keeps the church books. She looked at me like I stepped out of the wrong door. She did the same to my brother's wife. Don't let it matter." "It doesn't," Rosalyn said. "But it makes me sure I want to do right by this place." They left the store with a sack of goods, Ada holding a peppermint stick and swaying with contentment. On the ride home, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of cut hay. Rosalyn leaned her head back, letting it brush her temples. "Yates," she said after a while, "what would you think if I took your name?" He didn't answer straight off, just tightened the reins a notch. "I mean," she went on, "not just for Ada's sake, but for mine. I was someone else before I came here." "I don't want to carry that forward." He turned his head. "You sure?" "I'm sure," he nodded once. "Then we'll get it written proper." She let the words settle in her chest, warm and steady. They reached the house before dusk. Yates carried Ada inside, her peppermint still clutched in her hand. Rosalyn followed, her boots slipping off near the door. Later, as they stood by the washbasin, Yates reached for the back of her dress, fastening the tiny buttons she couldn't reach. His hands were gentle, his breath steady behind her. "I've known a kind of quiet all my life," he said. "But it never felt like peace until you came." She turned, her fingers resting against his chest. "I never had a place that didn't ask me to shrink. You don't have to here." They didn't speak again that night, but when they lay down, his hand found hers beneath the quilt. It stayed there until morning. The first frost came early, curling the last of the bean vines into brittle tendrils and dusting the roof with fine white before dawn. Rosalyn woke to the sound of Yates chopping wood behind the house, the steady rhythm of it echoing against the barn. She rose, tucked an extra quilt around Ada, and pulled on her boots without waking her. Outside, the light was soft and gray. She crossed the yard with her shawl drawn close and stopped a few steps from Yates. "You could have let me help," she said. He paused, setting the axe head down in the stump. "You looked warm." She picked up a split log and stacked it beside the others. "I can still be warm and working." He reached for another round of cottonwood, then paused. "Town clerk came by yesterday while you were in the shed." She looked up. "What for?" "Had the papers. Thought we might want to sign them before the new year." She wiped her hands on her apron. "And did you?" "I told him we'd come in together when you were ready." The wind tugged at the edge of her shawl. "I am ready, I've been ready." He met her eyes. "Then we'll ride in tomorrow." That afternoon, Rosalyn sat at the kitchen table with a small stack of muslin squares, stitching names into each one. She had begun taking down the stories of folks who came through the shed, recording what they brought, what they needed, what they left behind. Not for ledger work, but for remembrance. She had learned that people spoke more freely when they saw her hands busy. Yates came in with a coil of wire over his shoulder, his boots caked in drying mud. He set the wire down and leaned against the doorframe. "Had a rider pass through," he said. "Said the Harlan man went east, took up with a cousin in Illinois. No one's seen him since." Rosalyn didn't stop stitching. "Thank you for telling me." "I figured you might want it known," she nodded. "He's not part of this place, never was." He crossed the room, resting his hand on her shoulder. "No, he wasn't." That night they shared stew by lamplight. Ada sat between them, her cheeks pink from the cold and her voice low with questions about snow. Rosalyn showed her how to fold paper into stars, and Yates listened with his chin resting in one hand, his eyes soft. Later, after Ada was asleep and the coals had sunk low, Rosalyn stood at the hearth with her arms wrapped around herself. "You ever miss the sound of more people?" she asked. Yates crossed the room toward her. "Sometimes. But not more than I need what we have here." "I used to think I'd spend my life with a man who never saw me," she said. "Only what I could do for him, or what I looked like when someone else was watching." Yates didn't speak, just waited. "I didn't know love could be quiet," she said. "Could feel like rest." He stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "It can with the right person." She leaned back into him. "You're sure of us?" I've been sure since the first time you knocked on my door with dust in your hair and your voice shaking." She turned in his arms. "Then come with me tomorrow. We'll sign the papers and make it ours." He kissed her, his hand warm on the back of her neck. "We already are." They rode into Elk Hollow the next morning, Ada bundled between them on the wagon bench. The town was quieter than it had been in summer, the wind sharp and clean, the storefronts trimmed with pine branches for December. The clerk stood from his desk without needing to be asked and handed over the forms with a nod of greeting. Rosalyn signed first. Her hand didn't tremble. Yates followed, his name written steady and plain beside hers. Ada watched from the bench, her legs swinging. When they stepped outside, she reached up and took both their hands. They stopped at the dry goods store for 2 bolts of flannel and a jar of molasses, then turned the wagon toward home. Snow began to fall just as the barn came into view, soft and slow across the fields. That night, they lit a fire in the stove and made toast with the molasses. Rosalyn braided Ada's hair while Yates read aloud from a farmer's almanac, his voice low and even. When Ada fell asleep pressed between them on the couch, they didn't move her right away. Rosalyn looked over at him. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" He nodded. "I think about planting more oats, expanding the shed. Teaching Ada how to harness a team when she's older. I think about a new cradle," Rosalyn said, voice steady. Yates looked at her, his hand still on Ada's shoulder. "You think we'll need one?" She nodded. "I do," he smiled, slow and quiet. "Then we'll build it together." They sat like that a long time, the snow deepening outside, the fire burning low. When they finally rose to carry Ada to bed, Rosalyn paused in the doorway, looking back at the room that had become their life. She hadn't come west to find love. She had come to escape something that would have broken her. But in doing so, she'd stepped into a life that let her breathe. A man who didn't ask her to be less. A child who held her hand like it had always been there. And now, a home she had helped shape with her own hands. She turned to Yates, who waited at the top of the stairs, Ada's head resting against his shoulder, her small hand curled into his collar. Rosalyn reached for his free hand. "Let's go to bed." He squeezed her fingers gently. "Let's go home," and they did. Together every day after that.